They're watching you right now, not with their eyes, with their silence. You think you're having a conversation, but you're not. You're performing, and they're deciding whether you're worth keeping around. Have you ever argued with someone who just stopped responding? Not out of weakness, not because they gave up, but because they knew. They knew that every word you said was another piece of yourself you'd never get back. Nietzsche saw them, these people, the ones who win by refusing to play. He called them something most of us will never become. And the worst part? You've been losing to them your entire life, without ever knowing the game existed. Picture this, you're in a meeting, or a family dinner, maybe a relationship argument. Someone says something that's wrong, provably wrong, and you know it. So you explain, calmly at first, use logic, you reference facts, you're being reasonable, but they just look at you. No rebuttal, no defense, just this presence. And suddenly, you can feel it. You're talking faster, your voice gets higher. You're explaining more than you need to, justifying, over-clarifying. You didn't notice when it happened, but somewhere in the last 30 seconds, you stopped being right. You started being desperate. And they haven't said a word. Here's the thing nobody tells you about power. Real power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't argue. It doesn't justify. It doesn't even defend. Real power just is. And the people who understand this, the ones Nietzsche wrote about in the margins, between the lines, in the places most readers skip over, they've learned something you're still fighting against. That every time you open your mouth to prove something, you've already lost. Nietzsche had a term for what most people do in conversations. He called it the herd instinct, the desperate, clawing need to be understood, to be validated, to have your truth acknowledged by others as if their acknowledgement makes it more real. You see it everywhere. People explaining themselves to strangers, defending their choices to people whose opinions shouldn't matter, arguing on the internet with anonymous profiles they'll never meet. Why? Because we've been trained, conditioned, to believe that silence equals agreement, that if you don't correct someone, you're letting them win, that if you don't defend yourself, you're admitting guilt. But here's what Nietzsche understood that most people never will. The person who needs to convince you is weaker than you. Think about it. If someone truly has power, real power, why would they need your approval? Why would they waste energy explaining themselves to someone who won't understand anyway? They wouldn't. They don't. And that silence, that infuriating, uncomfortable silence, it's not emptiness, it's a mirror. And what it's reflecting back at you is your own need to be right, your own fear of being wrong, your own ego, thrashing around in the open air like a fish on dry land. Nietzsche wrote about the Übermensch, the one who transcends, the one who creates their own values instead of inheriting them from the crowd. And you know what the Übermensch doesn't do? Explain himself to people who haven't earned the explanation, because he understands something brutal, something most people spend their entire lives running from, that you can be right and still lose. You can have the truth on your side and still look weak, because truth without power is just noise. And the people who've mastered silence, they understood this before you even opened your mouth. If this is starting to make sense, if you're recognizing something you wish you hadn't, subscribe. Not for me, for yourself. Because what comes next is going to make you uncomfortable. And discomfort is where you finally start to grow. Let me tell you what happens in your brain when someone refuses to respond. Your amygdala, the fear center, it lights up, not because you're in danger, but because you've lost control of the narrative. See, conversation is a transaction. You say something, they respond, back and forth, predictable, safe. But when someone breaks that rhythm, when they just stop, your brain panics. It starts filling in the gaps. Are they judging me? Did I say something stupid? Do they think I'm weak? And here's the thing, they didn't put those thoughts in your head. You did. Their silence didn't attack you. It just removed the safety net you didn't know you were depending on. And now you're free-falling through your own insecurity. Nietzsche called this self-overcoming, but from the outside. The people who master silence don't need to tear you down. They let you do it to yourself. There's a study. I'm not going to cite it because that's not the point. But researchers found that in negotiations, the person who can tolerate silence longer almost always wins. Not because silence is powerful in itself, but because the other person will fill it with concessions, with explanations, with admissions they never planned to make. Silence is a vacuum, and nature, human nature, abhors a vacuum. So you fill it with your fears, your doubts, your desperate need to be understood. And while you're doing that, while you're performing this one-sided dialogue, they're watching, learning, cataloging every weakness you're volunteering. You think you're defending yourself, but really, you're handing them the blueprint to control you. And the worst part? You'll never know it happened, because they never said a word. Let me show you what this looks like. There's a woman, we'll call her Anna. She works in corporate, mid-level, competent. She talks in meetings, makes suggestions, tries to add value. Then there's David. David rarely speaks. When he does, it's one sentence, maybe two. Then he goes quiet again. At first, Anna thought David was just shy, maybe insecure, but over time, she noticed something. Whenever David did speak, the room shifted. People leaned in, not because what he said was revolutionary, but because he said so little that every word felt weighted. One day, Anna pitched an idea in a meeting. A good idea. She explained it thoroughly, covered all the angles, answered objections before anyone raised them. Silence. Then David looked at her, didn't speak, just looked. And Anna, without anyone asking, started re-explaining. I know it's not perfect, but if we adjust the timeline. David blinked, still said nothing. By the end of her second explanation, Anna had talked herself out of her own idea. She left that meeting convinced David had outsmarted her. But here's the truth. David didn't outsmart her. She outsmarted herself. David just let her, because he understood something Anna was still learning. That the person who talks the most is rarely the person with the most power. And the person who feels the need to fill every silence, they're not confident. They're terrified. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. You think this is about them, the quiet ones, the ones who weaponize silence. But what if I told you, you've been on both sides of this? Think back. How many times have you stayed silent, not because you were being strategic, but because you were afraid? Afraid to speak up, afraid to disagree, afraid to take up space. That's not power, that's submission. Nietzsche saw this too. He talked about slave morality. The morality of people who've been conditioned to believe that staying small is virtuous, that being quiet is being polite, that not reacting is maturity. But sometimes, silence isn't strength, it's surrender. And the people who've learned to use silence as a weapon, they can smell the difference. They know when your silence is strategic, and when it's just fear dressed up as wisdom. So here's the real question. When you stay quiet, are you choosing silence? Or is silence choosing you? Because there's a version of you, the one Nietzsche would call the Übermensch, who doesn't stay silent out of fear. They stay silent because they've already decided you're not worth the energy. They've assessed, calculated, dismissed, and moved on without saying a word. That version of you doesn't exist yet, but it could, if you're willing to kill the part of you that needs to be understood, the part that needs to be right, the part that's still performing for people who stopped watching years ago. So let me ask you something. Right now, in your life, who are the people that make you talk too much? The ones where you leave the conversation feeling drained, like you gave away something you can't get back. You know who they are. And here's the uncomfortable part. They know too. They know that when they stay quiet, you fill the space. They know that when they don't react, you react twice as hard. And they've been using that, not maliciously, maybe not even consciously, but they've been winning a game you didn't know you were playing. Nietzsche said something that most people misquote. He said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But here's the line people forget. And he who has nothing to prove needs no words to prove it. That's not in his books. That's what he lived. The people who outsmart everyone without saying a word, they're not smarter than you. They're not more strategic. They've just stopped caring whether you understand them. And that indifference, that's the most dangerous power of all. So here's your homework. For the next 7 days, practice this. When someone says something that makes you want to defend yourself, to explain, to correct, to justify, don't. Just let it sit there. Let the silence hang. See what happens. See who breaks first. And then come back here and comment one word. Not a sentence. Not an explanation. Just one word that describes what you learned about yourself. Because this video isn't about them. It never was. It's about the version of you that's still trying to convince people who stopped listening a long time ago, and whether you're finally ready to stop. The next video goes deeper. It shows you what happens when you realize you've been the manipulator all along. Watch it. Not because I told you to, but because you need to know. The weak explain. The strong stay silent. The wise choose when. Are you choosing, or are you still being chosen?